So here we are now, with brains that can think, that are each made up of lots and lots of molecules that can't think. In effect, the human nervous system is made up of lots and lots of little cameras that exist as a result of stable chemical reactions making more copies of those sets of cameras than of any other set of cameras. Those biological cameras, in other words, your senses, start different chemical reactions when they get hit by different sensory input. Those chemical reactions create different electrical signals in your brain. All those electrical currents in your brain mixed together create a replica of the outside world. It's not a replica in the sense of it being a photograph. It's a replica in the sense of it being a combination of electrical currents that correspond to a pattern of cause and effect in the outside world. It results in your body acting in a way that keeps you alive and makes more copies of your genes. We don't need to know what we're doing or why we're doing it. We just need to do it. Intelligence is the ability to recognize and act upon patterns. It's not simply the ability to make choices. Making choices is just the only time you notice that you're using your intelligence. When one choice is obviously better than all the others, there really is no choice to make, so there's really nothing to think about. Every time you leave your house or your apartment, you have the choice whether to lock the door or to leave it unlocked. But one of those choices is obviously better than the other, so you make the same choice every time without thinking about it. Then maybe you get halfway to wherever you're going and can't remember whether you locked the door or not. Your brain processes information that way all the time. Those are subconscious decisions. Sometimes the electrical currents in your brain create ambiguous replicas of the world, where two or more possible courses of action are fairly evenly matched in their predictions of the maximization of your genetic survival. That is when your consciousness gets involved. If you are ever faced with a few choices and one isn't obviously better than all the others, what do? You start thinking about it. You devote more brain power to the problem. You might use your senses to try to get more information to use in making your decision. And you might bring more information into your decision-making from other parts of your brain. And you might start ignoring other things happening around you so you can focus your attention on making the choice. If you see a cliff in front of you, your brain predicts that if you jump off it, you will die. So it doesn't send signals to your body to make it do that. Instead, it sends signals to your body to make it avoid the cliff. That's how you make every decision in life. That's how non-intelligent molecules created survival and reproductive instincts and created the pattern recognition that we use to act upon our survival and reproduction instincts. We are not capable of seriously considering acting upon any ideas that we don't perceive to maximize the survival rate of our genes in some way or another. We think this way because that's the pattern that 3.5 billion years of a self-perpetuating chemical reaction created. Namely, a chemical reaction that would make itself keep happening. Evolution had no way of creating a chemical reaction that could do anything else. At the same time, since evolution is a chemical reaction and chemicals can't think, evolution had no way of anticipating that our evolution was leading to some twists that could destabilize the self-perpetuation of our chemical reactions. The first is that we don't naturally perceive the existence of our genes. We just naturally perceive a desire to survive and reproduce. We also perceive ourselves to have other desires, but one way or another, all of those desires helped our ancestors survive and reproduce. Another twist is misinterpretation of our perceptions. Sometimes the signals that our brains receive from the outside conflict with each other. Sometimes information gets processed incorrectly and makes us perceive a future that appears to correspond to the maximization of our genetic survival, even though it doesn't correspond to it. In other words, sometimes we make mistakes and get ourselves into trouble. We can make self-destructive decisions by accident. Even a person who does want to kill himself perceives himself to be surviving and reproducing in the best way he can think of. I don't mean to make light of people committing suicide. I'm simply pointing out the fact that when people voluntarily carry out self-destructive behavior, they're still acting upon the perception of maximizing their genetic survival. So suicide doesn't disprove the first principle of evolutionary psychology. It just proves that something has gone seriously wrong with those people's perceptions. That's why suicide counseling depends on getting suicidal people to perceive their situation differently than they do now. This is also the reason people can think about ideas that don't maximize their genetic survival because they're neutral to their genetic survival, or even slightly self-destructive. If I wanted to, I could say supercalifragilisticexpialidocious right now, and that wouldn't have any effect on my genetic survival. Or I could smoke 10 packs of cigarettes in one sitting and harm my genetic survival. Either way, I would perceive those choices to maximize my genetic survival, even though they don't really. Another twist was that the genetic evolution of our brains eventually made itself obsolete. Generation by generation, our brains kept getting better and better at recognizing and acting upon patterns until they got so good at it that the predictions of the future that they could make and act upon could adapt so quickly that the brains effectively eliminated every threat to the survival of our genes. People still die prematurely. And sometimes dictators even exterminate entire ethnic groups. But the genes that create our brains are spread throughout the world. Wherever some people survive, the genes still survive. And the genes survive and don't continue to evolve because now the ideas the brains create evolve instead.